Welcome to Vlog 2, Skills versus Capacities in Speed and Agility. A skill limitation can be described as a motor skill dysfunction with respect to poor familiarity of the movement or a previous capacity limitation. And a capacity limitation can be defined as an underlying limitation in terms of stability, mobility, strength, or power. First up, we'll be looking at acceleration. I'll be looking at the initial acceleration and specifically the first 3 steps. In most sports, the key factor in linear speed is the ability to accelerate. Here is athlete A performing an acceleration. The first thing you notice is that the athlete's torso and body rises extremely quickly. Ideally, we want the athlete's torso to start at a 45-degree angle. From the first to the third step, this increases from 53 to 63 degrees, which is not optimal. As a result of this increase in torso angle, there is a quick decrease in the positive angle of the shin. When an athlete has a forwards lean and positive shin angle, force will be pushed back and down, thus propelling the athlete forwards. We do not want the athletes to start upright as force will be pushed directly down, so there will be less horizontal propulsion and more vertical propulsion. The athlete starts with a relatively explosive knee drive but lacks ankle dorsiflexion. As each step progresses, hip flexion decreases and so does ankle dorsiflexion. As a result of this lack of ankle dorsiflexion, the athlete lands on the midfoot, not the forefoot. This is not optimal as it increases ground contact time and there is a lack of pre-tension in the foot, so most of the forces will be dissipated through the ankle. Firstly, we conducted some capacity tests to identify if this was a skill or capacity issue. First performed an overhead squat, the athlete could not reach 90 degrees hip flexion. In addition, their heels started to raise off the floor. We then performed a knee to wall test and they did not reach an optimal range. We then conducted a Thomas test. He has a positive result as he can't keep his leg flat against the table, suggesting hypertonicity of the iliopsoas muscles. We also did an overhead walking A march. Here you can see a lack of balance, lack of stability and core strength as he is flexing laterally as he walks. Therefore, we can say that this athlete has a capacity issue that needs to be addressed first. The areas for improvement are hip mobility, ankle dorsiflexion range of motion, hip flexor strength, and core strength. To work on hip mobility, I would prescribe the world's greatest stretch, the 90-90 stretch for internal and external rotation, the couch stretch for the hip flexors, and banded psoas marches to strengthen the hip flexors. We then moved on to some hip-controlled articular rotations. To improve ankle range of motion, we performed some eccentric calf raises. And finally, to improve core strength, we did some split stance Pallof presses and dead bugs. Here is athlete B performing an acceleration. The first thing to note is the athlete's setup position. His front foot is flat on the ground and the shin is at 90 degrees. This means that when forces are applied down into the ground, he will get an equal and opposite reaction in a vertical upwards direction. This is undesirable as we want the forces to be expressed horizontally forward. Ideally, the athlete would start at a 45-degree torso angle. However, he is not far off. The athlete does quite well to maintain a forwards lean in his first few strides. The athlete lacks a high and explosive knee drive, along with a lack of ankle dorsiflexion. As you can see, the knee doesn't reach optimal height. This will be detrimental to his acceleration capabilities. An explosive knee drive with optimal ankle dorsiflexion is essential for high levels of force to be applied with the forefoot strike to improve acceleration performance. Finally, the athlete lacks a strong positive shin angle, and as you can see, he doesn't reach full triple extension. The targeted areas for improvement are an explosive knee drive, ankle dorsiflexion, positive shin angle, full triple extension, and his start position. The athlete performed an overhead squat where he reached optimal hip and ankle range while maintaining a neutral spine. Next, he did an overhead A march. He was able to achieve optimal hip flexion and ankle dorsiflexion. Thus, it can be concluded that he has a skill issue, not a capacity issue. We started with some A skips to focus on knee drive, ankle dorsiflexion, and forefoot strikes. We then moved on to some slow wall drills to focus on the knee drive, ankle dorsiflexion, and triple extension of the ankle, knee, and hip. The athlete struggled with the toes up cue, but I believe that this would improve with practice. We then progressed this to faster switches. As you can see, the athlete struggles to stay on the balls of his feet. His heels keep making contact with the ground. This may suggest that there is a weakness in his calves and Achilles tendon, which would suggest that there is a slight capacity issue here as well. As a result, I would also prescribe this athlete some calf strengthening and tendon stiffening as exercises, such as calf raises, pogo jumps, ankling, and some drop jumps. To improve his start position, explosive knee drive, and positive shin angle, we did some knee drives to the wall, focusing on leaning forwards and getting the weight in the ball of his foot before accelerating. We then did some falling accelerations. After these drills, I asked the athlete to sprint again for me. Although not perfect, huge improvements were made in such a short amount of time. As you can see, there is a clear improvement already in start position, knee drive, ankle dorsiflexion, positive shin angle, and torso angle. Next up, we'll be analysing a crossover step with a change of direction. A fast crossover step and change of direction is often needed in sporting situations. For example, in tennis or basketball, when moving quickly laterally across the court to get the ball or beat the opponent. Here is athlete A trying to perform a change of direction with the crossover step. When the athlete plants his outside leg to push off against it, the knee collapses into a knee valgus position and causes flexion at the hips and a forwards trunk lean. This highlights stabilization and strength deficiencies in the glutes and adductor muscle group. This is not optimal. We want the athlete to have a wide and aggressive planting step followed by a high knee drive across the body. As you can see, while the knee is collapsing, the athlete is rotating his whole body, so when he pushes off, he is already facing the direction of travel. He does not actually have to perform a crossover step across the body. Again, this is not optimal. This ground contact time highlights the low levels of force production and the slow change of direction. To assess if this was a capacity issue, we did a multi-directional squat test. As you can see, this athlete has serious knee valgus and stability problems. In each direction, the knee is trying to fall inwards, which supports why we are seeing knee valgus and a lack of strength in the crossover step. Knee valgus is characterized by hip adduction and hip internal rotation in a flexed hip position. Thus, to target these weaknesses, we started with some banded glute bridges and focused on pushing the knees out against the band. We then progressed this on to some hip thrusts and some single leg glute bridges. As you can see, the athlete did not have much control or stability while performing the single leg glute bridge. We then introduced some reactive neuromuscular training and performed split squats to facilitate glute activation and prevent dynamic knee valgus. To work on ankle and knee stability, I got the athlete to perform some single leg RDLs while holding a stick to provide some support while the athlete familiarized himself with the exercise. We then removed the stick to challenge him some more. To improve adductor strength, we introduced some modified Copenhagens. The athlete was unable to perform a full Copenhagen with just his ankle on the bench, so this is something to work towards. Finally, I got the athlete to perform some crossover step-ups to improve the single leg strength, and it also has a high level of correspondence with the crossover movement pattern. Lastly, we practiced some single leg lateral ice skaters. Here we were working on single leg balance, but also landing on a single leg while ensuring that the leg doesn't collapse or that we see any knee valgus. Here we have athlete B performing a change of direction with a crossover step. As the athlete starts to decelerate, he begins to drag his right foot along the floor to slow himself down. As a result, the knee is in a knee valgus position. This is not optimal as he has to readjust his foot, which is slowing down his change of direction. Here you can see that there is a lack of explosive knee drive across the body in the crossover step, and he does not reach full triple extension. Finally, as he plants his outside leg, he should be leaning towards his desired direction of travel, which is to his right. However, this is not the case. His torso is leaning out to his left, again slowing down his change of direction. We performed a multi-directional squat test and the athlete was able to complete it without any signs of knee valgus. From his capacity tests earlier, we know that he does not have any limitations in hip flexion, thus it can be concluded that this is a skill issue. First, we did a lateral shuffle to a stop, focusing on trying to keep his feet parallel when we stop. In his first few attempts, he was leaning away from the desired direction of travel and all of his weight was landing in his outside leg. But after giving him some cues to start leaning in before he comes to a stop, he manages to finish in a much better position, leaning towards his desired direction of travel. We then did a crossover step to a stop. In his first attempt, he wasn't driving his knee up and across and only reached 92 degrees of hip flexion. I then cued him to be more aggressive and powerful with the knee drive. This hip flexion then improved to 81 degrees. Although better, this is still something to be worked on. We then worked on linking some crossover steps together and changing direction with them. Performed a drill where the athlete had to shuffle over to the cones, pick the cone up and then perform a crossover step and accelerate away. I then got the athlete to perform the crossover step and change of direction again. Although not perfect, huge improvements have been made in such a short amount of time. He still drags his foot slightly, but there is a much more aggressive plant of the outside leg. He is leaning towards the desired direction of travel, and he has a more powerful knee drive in the crossover step. It is important for S&C coaches to understand if it is a skill or capacity limitation that is affecting their athlete's performance. I would say that it is important to do capacity testing first before working on improving the skill. It is possible for athletes to have both a skill and capacity limitation, just as we saw with athlete B, who mainly had a skill issue with his acceleration, but also had a slight weakness in his calves. So a program will be put in place to address both the capacity and skill.